Hey guys, it's Angie from the Freckled Builder and welcome to my channel. Today, I'm going to show you how I make these neon themed tabletop pieces. These pieces are all part of my Dream Glow collection, which are available in different themes such as Disney princesses, DC Universe and Marvel heroes and villains, popular wrestlers, Dragon Ball Z characters, and many more. In this video, I will show you the 5-step process of how I make them from start to finish. I will be providing a list in the description box of all the links to the tools and materials I used in this video. Hopefully my instructions are clear enough for you to either follow along or just watch for entertainment purposes. And just so you know, we're going to be making one of these, which is my heroes and villains theme. So without further ado, let's get started. As you can see, I broke up the tools and materials list into 3 categories: the digital print, the wood piece and name, and the neon light install. Step 1. Printing and laminating the character of our choice. I do all of my editing and file viewing in my Silhouette Studio Business Edition software. Prior to printing, remember to change your printing preferences. In my case, I changed it to HP Brochure Matte, and the printing quality, I changed it to best. I printed this on my inkjet HP Envy 6055E. Next, I take the printout and tape it down to whichever flat surface I'm using, just because I don't want to create any air bubbles. To remove any excess dirt or dust, I wrap my squeegee in a tissue paper and I just pass it slowly over the picture. Starting at the top right of the corner, I fold over the backing sheet so that it's easy to adhere. I then slowly apply some pressure starting at the midpoint, and then I take my squeegee and start to flatten it all out little by little. There's no rush when it comes to doing this portion because you can easily make an air bubble and you might have to reprint because there's really no fixing that. The reason why I wrap my squeegee with tissue paper is so that I avoid scratching the laminate sheet. Now we're all done with the digital part of it. Now let's move on to the wood. Step 2. Cut the wood, cut the name, glue up the last 2 pieces, and add the digital print to the front face. This wood that I'm using is 1/8 of an inch thick MDF wood. It can be found on Amazon or Home Depot. And I use this to cut out the front piece and the middle piece. For the backing and the stand, I'm using hardboard tempered wood. It's also 1/8 of an inch thick, can also be found at Home Depot or online. For the name, I'm using clear acrylic, 1/8 of an inch thick, and I'll be linking the store in the description box. So here's the front piece, the back piece, and the centerpiece. Because this piece was made for tutorial purposes only, I will not be adding the stand. But just so you get a little understanding of how the stand works, here it is. It's in 2 pieces. And once I turn over the back piece, you'll see how I center the first piece of the stand, which is right here. And usually the hole where the cord comes through will be on the side. And then I just attach this part, which makes it easy to disassemble if you have to move it. Now it's time to adhere the digital print onto the first piece. To give it a long-lasting adhesion, I use Gorilla Spray Adhesive. You can find this at Home Depot or buy it on Amazon. Now it's time to cut down the digital print. At this point, I'm just using the back piece to, measure out where I want to cut it. And for the purposes of this video, I'm going to be marking it first so you can see where I'm going to be cutting, just so you can get a visual of it. So I usually make 3 marks, which is the bottom, then on the side, and on the top. And the reason why instead of marking I cut, it's because when I cut it, it goes down to the other piece of paper that's under the sticker, and it helps me line up the wood piece. Now when I lift the paper or the sticker paper, you'll see the marks at the bottom, and with this piece of paper, I'm just going to tape it down so that it stays in place, and I use the markings as a guide. Once I line up the piece of wood exactly where the guides are, I slowly lay down the sticker paper and use my squeegee, applying some pressure, and just adhere it to the piece of wood. Now I turn over the piece and it's time to cut it down. Using my utility knife, I cut along the edges of the wood piece. I only trim the excess on the 3 sides manually, and I use a separate jig to cut the excess off of the name. Once I'm done trimming those 3 sides, I then turn my piece over and I use a jig I recently made to trim the excess off of the name. I line it up at the bottom left and the top left, making sure that it's not crooked. And then I take my utility knife and just run along the right side of the jig. When it comes to cutting on this side, I try not to apply too much pressure because I am working with an 1/8 of an inch MDF, and a great utility knife will definitely cut right through it if you do too many slices. So you just go lightly and try to trim as much excess as you can, slowly but surely. Once I cut off all the excess from the name, I then go in and cut off the excess from the other edges. This is a very thin cut that you're going to do. Nothing crazy. As you can see when I start cutting how thin the pieces come, and that just makes the wood piece look so much cleaner, and it's easier to adhere the neon lights when you trim off every single piece of excess sticker paper. Once I trim off all of the excess sticker paper, I then take my squeegee, flatten it out, and apply some pressure to the edges just to make sure it adheres properly. And then I set this piece aside because I'm maybe 90% done, because at the end we're going to add the name to it. But for now, it's done. And now it's time to move on to the glue up. We're going to take the back piece and the middle piece and glue those 2 pieces together. So now we have our front piece with the sticker adhered to it and the back piece glued up with the centerpiece. Step 3. Prep the neon lights for installation. For this character, we're going to be using the ice blue neon light. We're going to use the edge of the letter A as our starting point. Then we're going to continue to go down, creating an L shape. And there's going to be a slight excess of neon light, but that's okay because that part comes off a little later. Once cut, I remeasure to make sure that it looks good. And as I said, the little bit of excess that's at the bottom will be cut off. As we move along with preparing the neon lights for installation, one of the steps within this phase is adding heat shrink tubing to the end of the neon lights, just so the light isn't glaring at either of the ends, and it also gives it a nice put together look. The size of the heat shrink tube I use for this process is 10 millimeters. I cut the tubing into about 4 to 5 pieces, each of them being about 1/4 of an inch thick. I'll only use 2 from this pile, and the rest I'll just save for the next project. Now I grab one piece of the heat shrink tubing and I place it over the neon strip. And of course I kind of eyeball this part because I'm so used to making them that I kind of know where to put it. And then I slice the sides slightly, not too deep, I'll show you why in a few seconds. Then I apply some heat to the ends for a few seconds. I grab my utility knife and fold over one flap. This way it's nice and flat. This method works for me the best in my opinion. You can do it different if you want, but it's just a suggestion. I then turn on my heat gun, but this time we're going to do it a little different. We're going to use that part of the heat gun to flatten the second flap. Believe it or not, this method is kind of cool. I then apply some pressure while pushing into the heat gun. And what this does, it kind of melts the heat shrink tube instead of shrinking it, if you will. And after I've pressed down for about 15 to 20 seconds, I then put my heat gun down, of course turn it off first. Then I rub my neon end on a surface to kind of sand it. It's weird, but trust me, it works. Now that we're done with one side, let's move on to the next. So first I'm going to line it up once again because the excess that I'm going to be cutting off, I want to make sure that the very bottom lines up with the bottom left of the wood piece. Once I figure out where I'm going to be cutting, I make a mark. I usually use my fingernails because it makes a great indent, but you can't see it on camera. So I'm going to use a pen and I'll mark it for you so you see where I'm going to be cutting. When cutting neon lights, you have to be very careful. I cut the long ways before I cut down the side, just because I want to expose the LED light strip before anything. So once I get it open, I can see where I can cut perfectly without ruining the rest of the light bulbs. Now I'm going to make another cut here. So I'm going to use the little black line on the inside as my guide. I'm going to take my utility knife and make 2 slits down this way, 1 and 2. Now when you slightly try to pull apart the LED light strip and the rubber, you're going to see 2 copper pads in there. That's where we're going to be soldering our wires to. When making my Dream Glow pieces, I usually use this cord to connect to the lights, but for the purposes of this tutorial and not to waste them, I'll just be using electrical wire. Now with my Rosin core solder, I am going to apply some heat onto the copper pads on the inside of the LED light strips. Just tap them, you don't have to do much. Then I'm going to take these wires and I am going to solder them onto the pads. One thing I learned with soldering is that less is more when it comes to applying the heat. Sometimes all you have to do is tap it and then hold the wire in place and it'll harden on its own. You have to be careful when working with neon signs or neon lights that if you apply too much heat onto the copper pad on the LED light strip, you can burn it off and then it would be no good. So now that that part is done, what we're going to do is seal it with some glue and then we're going to test the lights. It's easy to do this part because inside of the rubber piece there's like a little slot where you can put the LED light strip back into place. Then once you have it in its place, as you can see when I hold it together, it looks like you didn't even cut it. So we're just going to apply some glue to it and hold it for a few seconds and then we're pretty much done with that part. Now it's time to seal the end with a heat shrink tube. Once again, I'll measure it out just to make sure that the cut was precise. And as you can see, it fits right at the bottom, which is perfect. So then I start bending the wire because I'm also going to tuck that part in with the heat shrink tube. So applying this heat shrink tube, it's the same process as the first one. You slide it on, covering a little bit of the wire. We'll do about the same as the first one. Then you take your utility knife and you slice the folds lightly. And now it's time to apply some heat. You do a few seconds of that. Now you take your utility knife and fold over the first flap. And for the second flap, we're going to apply the heat from the bottom of the gun until we see that it's melted enough. Then I'll take the edge and rub it on the flat surface to sort of imitate sanding. And of course, we're going to measure it out one more time just so I know that everything fits
perfectly. As I mentioned earlier in the video, I will not be using the black cord I usually use for all of my pieces because it'll go to waste since this is just a tutorial and this is just a test piece. Instead, I will be using electrical wire, which pretty much is the same thing. So what I'm doing right now is stripping the ends of this electrical wire so that I can add some solder to it, then solder it on to the wires that are on the neon strip.
Just remember that you don't have to hold the soldering machine there for too long. It's just a simple tap and it'll definitely mend. And for one last time, I'm going to test the light strip, make sure all the bulbs are turning on and it looks good.
Step 4. Finish glue up. For this part, I'm going to speed up the process because it's pretty self-evident. If you just watch along, it's pretty easy to follow. When it comes to gluing the neon lights, definitely take your time because you could easily spill some glue on the front face, and trust me, that gets messy.
Step 5. Glue, paint, and UV resin the name.
Before I start gluing the name, I'm going to wipe the front face with some alcohol just to make sure that the laminate on the sticker is easy to adhere to. When adding glue to the letters, make sure not to put too much glue because then it'll smudge over and spill into the picture, and you don't want that to happen because once it dries you can actually see it. So the less glue you put, the better. Prior to painting the letters with the acrylic paint pens, make sure to wipe it with some rubbing alcohol. In my opinion, it looks smoother when you paint it on and it also dries quicker. And I found that when I do it this way, it dries evenly.
And finally, the last part, adding some UV resin with a toothpick. Once I'm done with this, I'm going to set it aside and let it cure under the UV lamp for about an hour or two. Then it's time for the big reveal with the lights on.
Angie here. If you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, and subscribe
for more. Until next time.